Welcome to today's show. On today's show, I have with me Felix Ledger-Beadell, and he is with Access Your Life Limited. He does a blog about disabled travel. He knows the challenges firsthand. And so, Felix, you want to give us a little bit about your background and how you got started with your blog?
So background, nerdy scientist, was doing rehabilitation technologies as a postgraduate, and I've got a disabled girlfriend. Through my experience with working with people with disabilities, my personal experience, I bought my girlfriend a wheelchair and made lots of mistakes and realized that, you know what, you got to do more research firsthand than buy an expensive product and get it wrong. So that's what Access Your Life was launched for, because in simple terms, it's like the TripAdvisor of the mobility industry, in the sense that we have a huge directory of medical equipment reviews so that disabled people talk about their honest opinions on products and share their experiences, so that the next generation of people that have to go through that experience don't make the same mistakes.
Yeah. And I'll tell you that my wife and I, we've run through our challenges and found things that worked and didn't work as we've traveled and as we've rented and as we've used devices. So, well, let me start with this question, because we're talking about travel today. Though for everybody in the audience that's listening, you will find a link to his site. If you're thinking about renting a mobility device, buying a mobility device, or gadgets for your mobility device, you're going to want to check out his website, because there are reviews for all of those. We may touch on some of them, but let me ask you this question first. What would you say is the most important thing or the key point when you're going to plan for a trip abroad?
Preparation is key. Everything, like plan everything and have a backup plan. If you're traveling with your wheelchair, make sure you have your toolkit, because you just never know what's going to happen. We've lost the anti-tip bar halfway down Brooklyn Bridge. I lost a brake on the ferry at Disneyland in Florida. Luckily the bolt didn't fall through the cracks, and having to ask the American people what a Allen key or a hexagonal wrench, as you'd call it, there was complications around making sure you knew what the tool was. So after those experiences, I've always made sure that we carry a toolkit. Well, the best thing is, before you even leave, make sure your tire pressure's right, your brakes are tight, and tighten anything that can come loose before you fly or anything like that. That would be my first advice, and make sure you have your toolkit there in case, because you know what? It will surprise you what happens. So that would be my advice if you're traveling with a wheelchair. And also medication, if you have strict medication things, make sure you've got more than's necessary. Carry it in your hand luggage and not putting it in your main hold, because you know what? People arrive at destinations and their main luggage isn't there, and that can be a nightmare. It sounds crazy, but yeah, you can always ask your doctor to write you a note, which gives you extra hand luggage for free. So in the nicest way, we always carry any emergency medications and things with us, where I know exactly where it is. So if we need to get access it, or we get to a location and our suitcase doesn't arrive, we're covered. And then the other thing is, plan what you're going to do each day around your needs and make a backup plan, because sometimes you'll arrive at a venue and they say it's accessible, but you can't get your wheelchair under the tables, or they haven't got a ramp, or all these stupid things that get in the way, or they can't accommodate your allergy needs. So definitely plan. Often people with disabilities, because they're up during the night, you know what, actually that's a good time to do your research, because my girlfriend has found some outstanding deals in the middle of the night, and books, I give her a budget, and whatever she seems to achieve on that budget always surpasses my expectations. So take advantage of your silly hours. That'd be a bit of advice. But yeah, try. I know it sounds crazy, but just plan everything, like every day, every minute, down to the key, because having a disability is hard enough. And when you get out there, the idea is to relax. You can't ignore your disability and you have to go with it. But the point is, you want to negate its effect on your holiday. So the more you plan before, the more you can relax there, if that makes sense. So that would be, yeah, everything, like pill pots, numbered, labeled, crazy things like that. But it like, just go to the nth degree, because then when you get there, once you've unpacked and everything's where it needs to be, you can sit down, relax, and enjoy your time off together.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned one thing that I had never thought about, because I never travel with some tools. That will change after this, because we take my wife's wheelchair, and we've had things get broken, and it's never been anything I had to have tools to fix. But I do like the idea of taking tools. The one thing that you didn't mention, but you talked about medicine, and I want to include in your preparation, is you need to double check your medicines, how it's treated in the country you're visiting. I had an interview with John Grisdale, and we were talking about Japan, and he said there are so many things that are readily available in other countries that are not available and prohibited, or at least very difficult to get in without advance permission into Japan. So that's one of the things that you want to think about is look at your medicines and check the website for that country to make sure that you can travel with those
Embassies
drugs.
are normally the best point of call. Go and see your embassy and talk to your
Okay.
national embassies. That's how we in the UK do it. So
Okay. Yeah. And so for us, I'm not anywhere near an embassy, but usually you can find the information on an embassy website, or you could also reach out to the embassy and ask,
yeah,
because you probably would get a response with email. But I really appreciate the thought about the toolkit, because that's a great suggestion.
oh,
And like,
like yeah, losing the anti-tip bar halfway down Brooklyn Bridge at 40. So we walked out, and it was a hot day anyway. You get out halfway, there was sun reflecting off all the buildings and the river. It was hot. It was like nearly 40 something degrees, and it just wobbled off. And there I am in the middle of Brooklyn Bridge with people walking past, and yeah, it was a nightmare. But luckily, I always carry a set of hexagonal wrenches, as you'd call them. It sounds crazy, but it's a Meccano kit when you think about it. A manual wheelchair is like adult Meccano. So, do you have a Meccano in America? I'm guessing you do. It's like Lego, but with metal bolts and.
yeah, we used to call them erector sets.
Well, yeah, like that. I always see a wheelchair like that. So yeah, whatever, make sure you have the right spanner and the right hexagonal wrenches, because the last thing you need is a wheel coming off or something drastic like that, or a brake not working.
Okay, so what are some of the accessories besides the toolkit that you take with you that you find helpful? Because I know we've talked
So
about a couple of things.
Lauren loves her it's called a flexi, and it's by a charity called Mirror in the UK, and it's a phone holder that's on a flexible head. I'll give you the link for it. And Lauren uses that everywhere. So you've got Velcro on the back of your phone case, and it clicks on, and then instead of having your phone slipping off your lap or anything like that, she's got it. We always travel with different kinds of wheelchair blankets. Some waterproof, some not, because even if you're in a hot place, you'll go inside and the air conditioning will be really strong. And if for someone that struggles to regulate the temperature, my partner goes up from hot to cold really quickly. So we always travel with a specifically designed wheelchair blanket. And again, we've got a page with 5 different companies with different styles of wheelchair blanket the page is called Keeping Warm in a Wheelchair or Keeping Cool in a Wheelchair, depending on what one you need. But again, that's on our page if you need that. What other ones would Lauren always travel with? They're the main things, I would say, that and a rucksack that's wipeable that goes on the back, because it's amazing how much mud and dirt gets kicked up. So pick a rucksack that you can hang between the handlebars that doesn't affect it will affect the balance, but doesn't affect the way the wheelchair sits, but is wipeable, because it's amazing how much dirt and dust and things. On that topic, we've made Lauren's wheelchair hold more stuff with a company in the UK. I don't know what that would be the equivalent in America. It's called PYC, and they make these cool undercarriage bags that clip into the frame, so that underneath the seat you can have extra space for luggage and things. So for us, we have an assistance dog. So normally the assistance dog's blanket, food, water, Lauren's extra wheelchair blankets, everything like that. It's amazing what you can fit in with these things. Another one that company does, which is brilliant. I don't know what you call it, like shin pads, but it's padding that goes round the frame legs, so that when you're traveling, you don't get them scratched and scuffed. And they're just on Velcro, so you can take them on and off, but they're really good for flying with, to stop your frame getting bashed and beaten up. Yeah, they're basically padded Velcro sleeves that go on your legs and your arms of your wheelchair to stop them getting scratched and bounced. Those would be our, I got longer and longer the list, sorry, but those would be the ones that we always travel with.
Okay, so now you mentioned service dog, and so that's another thing that you have to prepare for, because depending on where you're traveling, you need to check with the embassy or with some source of
vaccinations. So you have to check with your vet that you keep with the coding, particularly in the UK. If you're traveling into Europe, you have to make sure the dog passed the test. They have certain vaccinations that they need to travel. They have to have a flea and wormer before and after a certain length of time. All the rules have changed again, so I can't tell you what's happened since we left on Brexit, but there's lots of things to consider. Making sure you have extra food, and again, in case you get in trouble with that, making sure you know where the local vet is there as well is really important. So whenever we travel, we always know where a vet is in case something bad happens.
Well, it was interesting because I did a little research for a cruise for somebody, and especially once COVID started, all of a sudden, all these ports and places are shutting down. Dogs aren't welcome at all. In fact, I did an interview with Kennard, and right now, the only cruises on Kennard that you can take a dog on are the UK only cruises. So if you have a dog that's from the UK and you can bring it on board and take it because it doesn't go to anywhere other than the UK,
Yeah.
and transatlantic. But any of their other cruises right now, you cannot take a dog on. So if you're blind or you need a service animal for any reason, you can't take it on board. And the food is a good thing too, because we talked about that in the interview. I was just editing it, so it's fresh in my mind. She said they make a place for the dog to use the restroom. That's not a problem. But medicines and food for the dog are your responsibility. It's not like they have table scraps from the kitchen that they'll bring out and share.
You'd be surprised. Sometimes they offer it. I mean, we've taken Fliss, Lauren's dog, to Disneyland Paris, and they have offered to cook special chicken breasts and things for the dog. So you set as much as you like it. We always make sure we have food, but you get special treatment. On a cruise, you also get upgraded to a sea view because they often put the dog toileting on your balcony, don't they?
I think sometimes they do, or they'll have a spot on a deck where they have it set up.
On some cruises, you can get an upgrade by taking your dog. We've not done it, but we've looked into it.
So all of these things are things that, especially if it's your first time traveling with a challenge, and no matter what the challenge is, the first time you're traveling with one, there's a lot of things that you may not think about. And that's part of why we're having this conversation today. So let me ask this next question. How do you do your research? We talked about the embassies. What else do you use?
Lauren uses the internet. In the nicest way, I'm really bad. I let her do all the stuff in the nicest way. We've always done that in our relationship. I say, I'll do the boring things. I'll pay the bills. And you use your money and your contribution to the relationship for the fun stuff. So that's how I'll cover all the boring things, and she gets that pocket to play around with. So I just let her free, but she just spends hours on the internet. And you know what the best advice is? Go on the internet or go on Facebook, go on Instagram, look for groups such as we're on and things like that, and ask people that have already done it. They're the best people, because the lessons you'll learn off someone who's been there. At the end of the day, you can go and get a representative. You can go to a set like a travel specialist. But again, it's the same issue in the sense that unless they sit in a wheelchair, they're not going to know what it's like, you know? Like they can go, yeah, it's accessible, whatever, but you could have in Europe or in the UK, you can have cobbled streets. And you know what? Taking a wheelchair down some cobbled streets, your bum will be numb in seconds. It's the most uncomfortable thing in the world. And unless you've experienced that, you're not going to know. So yeah, I think the best advice I can give you is go and find a forum and ask someone that's done it before, because yeah, they'll tell you what you shouldn't do, and base your plans around someone's experience, because that will help massively.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because my wife and I had planned out and booked, including using miles to get lay flat sleets on Delta to go to a Baltic's capital cruise. And then I started doing my research on the ports. And some of them, Stockholm is pretty nice. Seems like there was another one that was really pretty good, pretty easy, very accessible. But like in Lithuania, most of the things you want to see are on a cobblestone road up and down a hill. Okay. And in a manual chair, like you said, a scooter is better on cobblestones than a manual chair.
Absolutely. But you have the right equipment for the job. That's the point. And this is why I say always ask someone that's been there before, because there's nothing worse than going somewhere that they've said is inclusive and it's not inclusive to you because you haven't got the right piece of kit with you. I spent a fortune adapting my girlfriend's wheelchair so it's more comfortable to ride, particularly over rough terrain.
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing was St. Petersburg, all the research I did told me that it was not accessible for the most part. The museums, some of them had ramps. A lot of the places that you'd really want to see didn't have ramps. So you had stairs you had to deal with, didn't have lifts, and it didn't have vehicles to transport accessible. If you could get out, and my wife could have gotten out, and gotten into a bus, but they didn't have where you could just wheel in and they had a lift to the bus. Any of those kinds of things didn't seem to be available. And so I'm like, okay, this just is not the right trip for us. And we wound up canceling it. I was looking forward to it.
The sad reality is England and Europe are very old, as in compared to the American civilization. Like, you're lucky in the sense a lot of your buildings aren't too old. I mean, we've got houses that have got beams that go through some of our pubs. So like, you can't get a wheelchair through there because there's a structural thing right across the middle of that you're stepping over. And there's nothing you can do about accessibility on those things. So there's always going to be parts of these countries that it's semi-inclusive, and you may be able to get in the door, but you might not be able to go around the shop, or you might not be able to see, as you said, some of those things in the museum. You might not be able to go up certain places in churches and things like that, because if we're honest, disability was not considered when those buildings were built at all. And the rules and regulations to do with listings and protection and historical accuracy and that lot will stop them putting those alterations to lifts and things in. So yeah, the sad reality of it is.
Yeah, we run into that here in the U.S. It's funny because, again, U.S. is really big about ADA compliance and all of this. But a good example, and I tell this one a lot because I have a video on my channel about it. In the French Quarter area in New Orleans, which is kind of the oldest part of the city, really the historic district, the sidewalks are typically cobblestone, which would be bad enough, but they also slope at about 15 or 20 degrees. So you're going like this down the street, and it's like, okay, that doesn't work so well.
I mean, you get lots of those. You still get lots of that issues everywhere. Like, it's amazing. Yeah, if you've got a powered attachment like a Smooth or a Smart Drive, you've got to hold one wheel tighter than the other. Otherwise, you'll be going down a pavement and it's a driveway or whatever, and it's suddenly a slope. And if you're not paying attention, you'll veer off and enter the road quite quickly. No, it's not a safe world, really, for someone in a mobility object.
Well, and my wife was never safe when I'm pushing the wheelchair because I'm a tourist. I'm always looking to see what's around.
I'm so used to being told off that I'm so attuned to looking. And until you've pushed someone in a wheelchair, you never realize how much you notice where the drop curbs are, where the bumps are. Is there a crack in, well, you'd call it a sidewalk? Is the panel loose and there's a bit of an edge? Because before I upgraded the front wheels on Lauren's wheelchair, if you caught an edge, she'd almost get tipped out. So like, I learned, it was crazy. Like, you've just got to see everything in front of you. There could be a tree root that's come out in the wrong direction. It could be one of your concrete panels that's slightly loose, that's an edge. It is crazy what will happen if you don't have the right piece of kit, how attuned as a carer you have to be, and how the person in the wheelchair or scooter or whatever has to be alert. And exactly, you missed the opportunity. If you're trying to go down some beautiful historical street, the last thing you want to be thinking about is, am I going to fall out of what I'm sat in? You want to be able to look at the view, see those churches, see those buildings, see those whatever you're looking at. So that's a good point.
I have hit one or two missing cobblestones while I was looking some other direction. So it has been a challenge for me. Okay, so let me ask this question. What are your favorite destinations or the places you've been to for accessibility?
So weirdly for us, we like coming to America. So I've taken Lauren to New York multiple times. We do as many Disney parks as possible. We do like going to London, and I can talk about various disability things. And some bits of London are good, and some bits are really poor. You have to be careful with our tube, or you'd call it subway, because only certain stations are accessible. All the buses are accessible, and they have automatic ramps that come out. But bus drivers, if they've got prams on or things, will often drive past if they're already full. And okay, they're every 10 minutes, but it's not the point. You should be allowed to get on. And once you're accustomed to American service and buses being stopped, people being moved out of seats and things, an American person might find it odd to have that experience. I mean, we've moaned and complained, and it still happens. But that's the sad reality of it. Some people just aren't as inclusive as they should be, really. But there is the facility to do it. I think the biggest mistake people make in London is not realizing, if you're a tourist, how close the tube stations are together, in the sense that it's often quicker to walk what you'd call a sidewalk. Normally, the stop you're trying to make that you think is the next block or whatever is normally visible, or it's less than a 10-minute walk, and you've probably spent more time following all the tunnels down to the subway to go one stop than you would have done if you'd have just walked in a straight line.
Yeah. And it was interesting just talking about it. I did some research for somebody in the group that was wanted to go to London. And that was one of the things I started looking at, how close they were, and also looking at the stops, because you'd have an accessible stop and maybe 2 stops that weren't accessible. And so it was quite interesting. Again, it's one of those things that you would have to plan your itinerary if you are going to use the tube. Okay, here's where I get on and here's where I need to get off. And you might be able to walk one stop either way to get to the specific place you want to be.
If the weather's nice, we'll always walk, because you're going to see more of the place. Yeah, especially England's known for its like features, its old stuff, and it's amazing how many old buildings are in between the new. And like, yeah, there's just weird things like gargoyles and things on churches, and hidden carvings in old Tudor houses, and there's like so many things that people will walk past every day and not enjoy, that you wouldn't like, you won't get, if that makes sense. Like, it's amazing when you go on tours around America or New York and they'll say, here's the oldest church or whatever, and there are houses and buildings 3, 4, 5 times older than some of your oldest things in America. And you can see real historical aging of houses when you walk through London on pretty much any street. Like, nothing's really been cleaned out that much, that there's always something down an alleyway or something that's very different and old and yeah, really unusual. So yeah, that would be my recommendation: walk as much as possible. The tube is doable. Central London's really difficult. You'd have to use Green Park. So often we will walk around that and get off there. But as I said, buses are normally the best port of call if you want to do it, other than on the circular line that's pretty much completely accessible.
Okay.
I'd say taxis are really good, I should say. Black cabs, yes, you pay a lot of money, but they'll stop. They have ramps. They're really big on the inside, and they do look after you. And the whole point of a black cabbie is to look after the person. And you'll never have, yes, you will pay more money for it, but you'll never have a bad experience, because cabbies will go to the nth degree to look after a person with a disability.
Yeah, I was saying, and that was the one thing that struck me as I was doing my research, was how accessible the taxis were. Because, and it's really interesting, accessible taxis in the US are very much hit and miss. When we were preparing for this, I told you the story about the Port of Miami, and we called for an accessible taxi, and one didn't show up for 3 hours. Finally, the only thing that did show up was a taxi that we could stick my wife's wheelchair in the trunk with our luggage and stuff, and no way to tie the thing down and hope that all the pieces got to our destination. And I'm like, it shouldn't take 3 hours, and that's the best you get. You should be able to get an accessible taxi here in the US. But that's typical in a lot of places in the US, is finding an accessible taxi is a real challenge.
That's definitely the way London's got around the tube not being great, as in the cabs and the buses are accessible.
Okay. You had another favorite destination that you travel to a lot. You want to talk about that?
What, Disneyland Paris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Paris and Disneyland Paris.
So we've flown in, we've gone on the Eurostar, which is like your Amtrak, I think is what you'd call it, and the train and stuff like that. One thing I would say is flying into the Paris airport, I think we had an awful experience, in the sense that you can get a slip that means you can take your wheelchair to the aircraft door. However, for some reason, France doesn't have the same law. So there we were, flew to Paris, and we were escorted at gunpoint off the plane because we refused to get off the plane until the wheelchair was brought to the door, because that's what we had booked and had arranged. It got to the point where the pilot had to go and get Lauren's wheelchair off his own plane and bring it up. So make sure you research or find out what the rules are, because if you can't be transferred and put in one of those transferred wheelchairs and then go and get your wheelchair back at the luggage point, that's going to be a disaster. And yeah, luckily our pilot spoke a bit of French and wasn't going to have it, and had to put his own high-vis jacket on and go down to his plane and get Lauren's wheelchair himself. But yeah, it was not a pleasant experience, and bad, really. And yeah, like, that was a shocking thing. So now we often travel on Also, my girlfriend's allergic to airplane air, so we travel with oxygen machines because she goes into anaphylaxis because of how you wouldn't believe how dirty airplane air is. And you think with COVID and stuff, if you think that air is being cycled around the plane repeatedly, you suddenly realize how dangerous being in a tin can up in the air is. So we often now travel on the Eurostar, and for us, that's a far better experience. There's no weight limit on your luggage. You can pretty much have as much as you want. And it's scanned. Taking the assistance dog is easy. They just got microchips at the scanner at certain stations. So now we'll take the train and fly. So if anyone has any questions about Disneyland Paris, my girlfriend is more than happy to tell you, because if she's lucky enough, she goes twice a year. So there isn't much about Disneyland Paris she won't be able to answer for you.
Okay, so in Paris in general, outside of Disneyland Paris, because I know Disney does a great job on their properties. We've taken my wife's wheelchair and gone to Disney World several times, Disneyland a couple of times. So we've been very impressed. Though I will say the one thing that has changed recently that probably avoids abuse, but it's not nearly as convenient as it used to be. Because in the US, it used to be if you were in a wheelchair, they had a special line and you went right to the front of the line. Now in a wheelchair, you've got to get a ticket and you can't go until that ticket time. So if it's an hour wait, you got to wait for that hour, and then you just come back with your ticket and they'll let you ride.
It's more like the old system, as in you have a lanyard and you always go in the exits still. So it's more like the old system because they don't have the electronic wristbands and stuff. It's more like that old system where, yeah, you may work 15 minutes in the exit queue, but not really ever more than that. So it's not as complicated. Once you've got your little lanyard with what your disability is and what your needs are, it's pretty easy. But again, my girlfriend would help through all of that. If you were making that plan, we've done it enough times. She's an annual pass holder. Anything on that form, she'll be able to help you with. On Paris on a whole, we haven't actually done it yet together. We looked into it a couple of times and it's on the agenda at some point, especially now we've got more an off-roading power chair, because from what we've heard from our users is it's not very accessible. Again, it's the cobbled streets and things. But a lot of our users that have done it have said how Paris isn't as accessible as it should be. So in all honesty, we haven't quite ventured in what that is on the agenda, especially now we've got, like I said, the more piece of kit that's going to be not going to have a problem with it. Apparently there's not many drop curbs and it's cobbled and it's nowhere near as accessible as it should be.
Okay, so let me ask, when you go to Disney Paris, where do you stay? Is there a hotel right there you stay at then?
Yeah, like Lauren will stay in, because she's an annual pass holder. She gets, at certain times of the year, she gets 50% off Disney hotels. And again, talk to Lauren because she'll tell you what the deals are, when to get them, and everything. Okay. I don't know how she does it, but whatever she gets on the budget I give her is always incredible. So if you want a deal and you're willing to stay up late at night and do it, well, the thing is, because you're time zone, you'll be fine actually. Booking she'll tell you all the secrets of when to go and what times are quiet. But we always stay on site. There's a Radisson Blue that was off site that we stayed at, and we had issues with, they used to provide, because their buses weren't accessible, they used to provide an accessible taxi, and then that got too costly for them. They stopped that, and we had a bad experience one time. But they've now upgraded their buses so that they are accessible if you're staying off-site. But there's only a few hotels in Disneyland Paris that are off-site, if that makes sense. It's much easier to stay on-site.
Okay, and then how accessible is like taxis and buses for accessibility in Paris? Do you know?
Again, well, I don't think it's great from what we've heard. Okay. I can't say from personal experience, but from our users, Paris on the whole is a challenge.
Oh, very good. Well, I kind of covered all of the things that I had on our list to talk about for today. I think at some point in time, maybe we'll have you back on and we will visit again about some more places and things. I enjoyed our conversation immensely, Felix. It was very nice of you to give us some time. I know it's late at night there. So I will say thank you to everybody that stayed. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. You're going to find links in the comments below, so that you can find out about his blog.
Try and list all the products for you.
Yeah, he'll try to give us some links to list products, but to give you the information you need. And Alex, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful guest.
No problem. Thank you for having me.